Welcome everybody joining us for the Ekahau webinar today.
And on today's webinar, we'll be talking about Wi-Fi in challenging environments, right? Part of our series that focuses on specific verticals and venues. And for this week, we've decided to talk about the challenges that are unique to hospitals and healthcare.
And you've got your regular host between myself and Troy, and Dale is also here helping us out in the chat and Q&A. We did think our favorite psychic Stu was going to be here, but he's actually at a on-site customer visit today, so isn't able to join us. But the real star of the show is going to be Aaron, who's going to be sharing his incredible insights and experience with working in healthcare Wi-Fi. So Aaron, how are you? Maybe you can just tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Hey Matt, doing great, and thank you for the introduction. So I've been doing network engineering in healthcare for probably 10 plus years. Um, Kind of started working with different partners and VARs and MSPs and stuff like that. And over the last 6 years, I've really gotten to focus as a full-time employee for hospitals. So I spent a few years at the local children's hospital, and then I'm a little over 3 years at Healthcare, where I'm currently at.
Amazing. And Dale, if people want to stay in touch with us outside of the Ekahau webinars, there's a couple of platforms that they can do that, right?
Yes, absolutely. So if you're interested in talking all things Ekahau, people like yourselves, people internal to Ekahau, just all things Ekahau, there's a Slack channel that we have. It's open to the public. So to the left, you see the QR code for that. If you're interested in providing feedback, feature requests, reaching out directly to our product team around the solutions associated with Ekahau, you can use our user voice portal for that. And to the right, you'll see the QR code to enroll in that.
Thank you, Dale. And before we jump into the webinar, we just wanted to maybe show you that we have all had our experiences working in healthcare Wi-Fi. So this on the left-hand side is me going back a few years ago using my laptop and some dongles to capture the Wi-Fi information. We've got Troy in the middle here with his iPad and Psychic 2, and we got Aaron as well. And if you take a look a bit closer, you can see the difference between Troy, how happy he is because he's using his Psychic 2 with his iPad versus me going back quite a few years ago now, probably over 10 years, having to use my laptop and dongles. So you can clearly see the difference in the happiness between our faces in this picture here. But yeah, we've done a lot of healthcare Wi-Fi between us. And then Aaron, this was your picture that you shared with us as well.
Yeah, so that survey was old enough that that was with the Sidekick One and the iPad that I did that with, and that was in an OR. Um, that they were having some issues mid-surgery, and so as the senior engineer, they called me into the operating room during the surgery, and I was able to see a lot of interference very, very quickly with the Analyzer app, and come to find out there was two APs in that OR, and so I shut down one of the APs, and they were able to complete the surgery without any further issues with the remote imaging devices.
Yeah, we was talking about this example just before the webinar started today, and Aaron, I remember you saying that how critical it is for you to have access to tools that you can reliably work with fast and first time, and the fact that you was under such a time constraint pressure to get in there and find the problem and resolve it must have been quite a stressful piece of task for you.
It is, one of my favorite phrases is first time, every time. And that is, fortunately, that's what we get from the Ekahau platform from both the apps and the Sidekick. And I will say I was in and out of that OR in under 4 minutes and had them resolved thanks to how quickly I was able to see what was going on with the co-channel interference and everything.
Glad to hear that. So yeah, back over to you, Aaron.
Um, so, one of the interesting things about healthcare is when you look at wireless designs, and I've heard them mention like Keith Parsons earlier, and some brilliant minds out there, and they talk about if you're to design a Wi-Fi from the ground up, here's what you would do and here's what it would look like. And the longer that I've been in healthcare, the more that I've been put in positions where it's like, well, we can't really do that because if we follow that Wi-Fi design rule, then we kind of stop this device from not working. And so, we're going to talk a little bit today about why healthcare challenges and breaks a lot of the clean Wi-Fi design rules that we have today. So when you talk about the rules that are really preached and what makes a great, RF space for wireless is, preferring 5 gigahertz and 6 gigahertz is really, really growing. We're trying to offload newer laptops and newer mobile devices and things like that at our hospital onto 6 gigahertz as quickly as we can to free up space on the 5 gigahertz. You try to minimize 2.4 and do your best to try to eliminate it because that's just co-channel interference. When you're like us and you've got 5, 6, 7, 800 APs in one site, getting away from that co-channel interference in 2.4 is just not going to happen. Design for roaming. We're going to touch on this a lot today. Because you want clean roaming, and in healthcare we run into a lot of scenarios where when you design for one device to roam, you make it so that a different device doesn't roam because they have competing requirements for what roaming looks like. And so we'll touch on that some today. We always preach trying to raise minimum data rates to shrink down those cell sizes and, try to get clean cell boundaries and standardize your clients. And, standardizing clients is something in healthcare that's just not an option. And so we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So the reality check for healthcare is 2.4 is not going to die. It's going to be around for the foreseeable future. There's telemetry and RTLS is some of the biggest that we still see in our hospital that is relying on 2.4 and 2.4 only. One of the most critical devices is infant tracking tags. And we got just these itty bitty little cute tags that we put on the feet of infants, and we're able to track them, within, 1 to 3 meters in the hospital. And we had a lot of issues during the deployment, and I begged them, I'm like, please, do you guys have something that works on 5 gigahertz? And they're like, nope, we're only going to develop for 2.4 for forever. And they scream really loud. They beacon at neg 19, so they're pretty loud devices, and they get heard by a lot of APs. Clients that don't roam. Healthcare, sometimes I feel like we write the book on sticky clients. It's like these manufacturers have a contest to see how sticky they can make their clients. And iPhones is one of the things that's growing very, very quick in our environment because of Cisco Jabber. Epic with their Rover application is making it so that more devices can happen on the iPhones. And the way the environment is it wasn't appetizing, and I had several situations where iPhones would still be connected to 6 to 7 APs away from where it actually was. But yet, though, so it's you try to fix that, and then you have these GE telemetry devices that are used to monitor, the patient's heart and their breathing while they're in transit from one room to another, patient critical, life saving, and those don't like to roam when the RF space is set up to make iPhones roam. And so, those competing devices is something that we fight a lot. Old firmware. So if you don't know, the FDA has a lot of rules where once a device and the software that works with that device is created, that you cannot upgrade it or you cannot change it without going through a full approval process with the FDA again. And a lot of medical IoT manufacturers say once we get our original approval, we're done. We're not going to update. We're not going to upgrade. We're not going to change. We're not going to go through that again. And so, a lot of times there gets bugs in their firmware and it's going to be stuck for forever because the vendor has absolutely no intentions of upgrading that. Hostile RF environment, elevators everywhere. And I know there's other verticals that can relate to that, but in hospitals, we try to have patient-facing elevators every so often. We try to have service elevators that are for employees only, that's, taking large carts of things up and down between different floors. Um, MRI rooms with their lead-lined walls and things like that, and mobile equipment. Um, there are X-ray machines that actually have their own AP that's uh, vendor provided and vendor supported, that sits on top of the X-ray machine. And when the X-ray is taken, it communicates back to a laptop that's on the control room. And again, we've asked to, try to not have those APs in, but that's the only way the functionality works. And so, they're usually set on static channels and they're mobile. And so when they take it to another area, it could be interfering with APs and channels that we have. And density is another thing. We talked a little bit about RTLS, different types of badges, from Vocera badges that people can talk through to different types of swipe badges. Mobile carts, those are everywhere in healthcare. And the IoT explosion, you've heard me talk about a little bit already, and we're going to hit a lot on it today. Medical IoT is everywhere. They have very poorly written TCP/IP stacks. And how they're designed to work with the wireless network is not always the greatest ever. Next slide. And so, in your typical enterprise, you try to optimize the Wi-Fi, and in healthcare, it's really about how do we manage the risk and how do we manage the unpredictability with all the devices that we have. Because with healthcare, Wi-Fi isn't always about making things fast. It's just about making something that's very poorly designed work as reliably as you can. Some of these devices that nurses are using for communications, if they're in a patient room that's kind of at the end of the hallway, and if that patient happens to code, it is literally life or death on that patient that communication device works the first time that the nurse tries to use it. And so, it's always those kinds of challenges. Next slide, please.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I remember we was having a conversation before the webinar around like why like healthcare is such a unique, challenging environment, because it has its own mini kind of ecosystem of so many
Yeah,
types of requirements and needs for different types of devices, different things you're going to find in the site. Also, as well, that healthcare environments are notorious for moving things around and not keeping the let's say like the MRI machines or the X-ray machines in the same
very much
locations,
so.
and then they move them to a new location, and that means now they're installing like lead walls in different places, but the floor plans don't get updated. So where you think that you're going to have coverage before, you've now got these crazy attenuating factors there that cause the RF to not travel as far as it was before, which will enforce a redesign. I know you're going to touch on a little bit of some of the patient experience stuff in a few slides time as well,
Yeah,
but the difference between having good Wi-Fi in a hospital can have a huge impact on the experience for the patients. I I know we were talking about this earlier as well, is that in the UK, quite a lot of the hospitals they don't have great cellular signal in there because of the way they're built. The actual cell signal you get inside of the hospital isn't very good. So the connectivity that patients are requiring to use is going to be is using the Wi-Fi. Same for the nurses and the doctors. So if the Wi-Fi isn't good and isn't covering the areas you need it to and can't provide that stable connection, then a lot of the time that people that are in the hospital, they can't connect with people outside, especially when they're outside of like those patient visiting times. So it plays a huge part on the experience for patients when they're in the hospital as well. But thinking about some of the critical devices that operate over Wi-Fi, you've got the workstation on wheels, you've got the IV pumps and other medical devices. I remember back in the day when a doctor or a nurse would turn up at a patient bed, the information about that patient would be on a clipboard on a piece of paper at the end of the bed, that they'd find out all that data. Now it's changed to tablets or iPads where they pull down this data over a connection over Wi-Fi to find out this information to then be able to have that conversation with the patient. So there's so many different types of devices that you have to be able to get connected to the infrastructure and to work well. It's you hit the nail on the head earlier with what you said, Aaron. It's not just a nice to have now. It's patient safety for sure.
absolutely.
As Matt mentioned earlier, a lot of the hospital experience comes from the patient perspective, right? So while they're in there, maybe it's the day after the surgery or they're spending an extended time in the hospital environment. They need something to entertain their minds, right? And this day, this age, people are watching streaming videos onto their mobile devices. They're bringing Xboxes in, playing games while they're in the hospitals. These devices need access to the Wi-Fi network so that patients can take their minds off, the pain, maybe the suffering, the loneliness that they're feeling in the hospital, and have an improved experience. And hopefully, through all of that, that they'll recover better and faster while they're at the hospital. You also have situations to keep patients healthy and to promote their recovery. There may be gardened areas inside the hospital, so little closed parks with a little bit of maybe some grass, some sunlight, a little bench they can sit on. Or maybe patients sometimes will walk up a flight of stairs or two just to increase their heart rate a little bit to get some physical exertion. In those areas, if something does happen, they need the reliability, the confidence that if they need to page or flag a nurse, alert the person that they're hurt or injured or suffering a little bit, they need to be able to press that button and know that that alert message, that call to help, will be successfully received and that someone will come to their assistance. So there's a lot of things that you need to consider as you put together a hospital Wi-Fi solution to maintain that patient experience.
Yeah, and Troy, if you don't mind, real quick, I want to throw in a quick anecdote on this. You brought it up. In my time with the pediatrics is, it's amazing how important those Xboxes and PlayStations were to the patient experience for those kids. They're scared, they're in pain, sometimes they're really, really sick, they're in the hospital for months at a time. And and your heart just goes out to these kids. And so it's just like from the network engineering perspective, what can we do to try to make their lives a little bit better in this awful situation that they're going through? And so it was, how do we get their Xboxes for out of home and get it in the hospital? How do we get it online? And how do we secure it? How do we get these devices on a network that doesn't have a direct layer 3 access to Epic? And this was a really great point, Troy, and I'm really glad you brought this up because it's important. It's sometimes providing that just momentary relief while they play their games can make all the difference in the world for those kiddos.
Absolutely.
And we mentioned it before, but the in healthcare and in the hospitals, having the X-rays and the MRI machines, they're typically surrounded by lead walls, which have a huge impact on the attenuation that it causes to the signal of the access point. It's not necessarily you would have APs in these rooms, but in and around it, you would have planned initially from a design perspective, like how much this was going to cause attenuation and plan for APs around these types of areas. From what I've seen in the past before, Aaron, I don't know if you've had this as well, is that sometimes the location of these machines, they get relocated to different parts of the hospital or different floors completely, and sometimes those lead balls don't get removed, and that means that
Yep.
when you and they might be like repurposing it for offices or something else. So that means that the coverage in those areas is going to be quite tricky with the type of material in those walls, but also then when they move to another part of the hospital as well, is going to enforce you to redesign how you're going to be planning coverage for those areas. And also how much of an attenuation these things can cause. So it's really good to make sure you understand like when this is happening and when you might need to plan for a new design or how this is going to impact the current connectivity that you have.
Yeah, and we just ran into this actually last month. We had a room that was a storage room, and they were having some Wi-Fi issues, and the AP was right out in the hallway and didn't make sense. And so we did the survey, and the attenuation from the hallway to the in the room was almost 100%. There was almost no signal at all. Come to find out, a decade ago, there used to be an MRI in that machine in that room, and it was lead-lined walls, and it had been repurposed for over a decade as a linen closet, and nobody could figure out why they got why they weren't having good Wi-Fi in there. So that's interesting you brought that up because we just literally ran into that.
Mhm.
And it's wild.
Yeah.
There's so many different challenges in the hospital and healthcare environment. You have multiple competing and often conflicting design requirements, We were designing for high capacity throughput, transferring large images and video content from the different imaging equipment. You have doctors and nurses that are on active voice over Wi-Fi calls, walking up and down the hallways, needing to roam, potentially going into those stairwells, right? Up and down elevators, right? So how do you manage the handoff between those client devices so that they stay connected? Um, in a past life, I was working at a hospital project, and on the drive to the hospital in the morning for that day of surveying, the cab driver asked me what I was doing there. If I was a doctor, I was like, no, no, I'm just working on the IT side of things, making Wi-Fi better. And then he started asking me questions about Wi-Fi. So I gave a typical spiel about what Wi-Fi is used for in the hospital, a lot of the things we've already talked about on the call today. And he asked me, why don't people just use their cell phone for that? Why don't they just use 5G? Right? And as we've mentioned already, some of the challenges you have with 5G coverage is that it's not pervasive everywhere. And when they do put in overlay systems or parallel 5G systems in parallel to the Wi-Fi networks, often those DAS type antennas are competing for the same ceiling space as your Wi-Fi access points, right? So one of the things you need to be mindful of is the separation between access points and those DAS antennas, so they're not so close together, not sharing the same ceiling tile, because
Yeah.
even though they are using separate spectrum, if they're too close together, those different frequencies will bleed and overlap with their sidebands onto the neighboring radios, causing interference and intermittent issues that you may need to troubleshoot. Also, find other systems that are used for real-time tracking. Turns out there's a lot of valuable assets in hospitals, things like newborn babies that we don't want people walking into the hospital room or the prenatal room with someone else's kid. We need to track and alert for people or high value assets that are leaving areas that we don't want them leaving from. So we need to be alerted on those kind of things. And sometimes those use maybe the same frequency bands as Wi-Fi, but it's a dedicated in parallel network that we need to coexist with. And so, Aaron, you've had some troubleshooting issues that you've had to find across your hospitals. How would you approach some of those things?
So again, in terms of troubleshooting, it just always starts with what's this real symptom? Sometimes it's that's half the battle is just figuring out what the real symptom really is, and then go from there. And the surveys, really, really help. I've only been at Premier for, a little over 3 years, and this you know, wireless network was in long before I came around. And so it's like so much of us in life, we're just kind of dealing with somebody else's design, somebody else's install. um and so we do a lot of surveys now to help us with troubleshooting, because it didn't these surveys didn't exist before. There weren't necessarily post installation surveys done after they were installed, which I highly recommend. Always do your post install validations. um, and so the trouble, to get to the point of this slide is, you know, some of these hospital buildings are huge, and drawing the doors and the windows and the walls by hand would take hours, weeks, months. Sometimes these are so large. And that's even if you're lucky enough to get an updated CAD file. Our hospitals are always under, all five campuses are always under constant construction. I mean, there's never a time when we're not under construction. And going back to the babies that Troy mentioned a little bit ago, that is, part of something that's really near and dear to us, is we want to be able to track these babies, make sure they are where they're supposed to be when they're supposed to be there, and make sure that they're not where they're not supposed to be when they shouldn't be. And we use the hug system, and it alerts us. You can program in where the baby's supposed to be, and when the baby leaves that area, we can get alerts. But that's all dependent upon the accuracy of the location of when that tag beacons to the network on 2.4 at neg 19, and the network accurately hearing it. And so The one feature that we use the most, I want to kind of talk about the nuts and bolts about Ekahau for a minute, is the Just Go survey. It has been an absolute lifesaver for us because of our inability to get updated and accurate maps, and especially with these baby tracking areas and things like that. And so, we're able to go in 2.4 and figure out where we're oversaturated. And if a baby tag beacons in this area, instead of being heard by just 4, 5, or 6 APs, it's going to be heard by 30, 40, 50 APs. And so the JISCO survey has just been absolutely phenomenal for us. And we use it weekly. Um, and again, I'm going to go back to the phrase "first time, every time." It works very, very well. The only piece of advice that I would give with the JISCO surveys is make sure that you have enough light for the camera to be able to read when you go into these rooms. That was really the only technical issue that I ran into, is sometimes when we go into rooms that were too dark, the survey would stop. And so that was just easy enough. Is we would plan our walking path. We would make sure that all the rooms that we were going to go into had proper lighting, and that immediately resolved that issue and didn't have any further problems after that. And it's crazy accurate. I mean, it's just beyond me how Ekahau did this, but it's, where there's 90-degree wedges in the room, like the JISCO survey is picking that up, and it's so accurate that we're actually able to be like, hey, we know this is a room that has a pillar in it. And, even though this is a map that doesn't have the room numbers on it, we can go and look at the survey, see which room has the pillar in it, and boom, we know exactly where we're at with our survey.
And Aaron, just to clarify, like the image that everyone's seeing on the screen right now, this is one that you shared. Like, this is an actual Just Go
Yes.
survey of one of your um, venues that you did complete.
Yep. So this was one of the ones that we did with the Hugs infant tracking area. And we will actually see kind of a more screenshot of this coming up later when we talk about some other features. But yeah, this is a real survey, that I did. And, maternity is a really tough area to get into every rooms. And we worked with leadership and we worked with the nursing staff. And even though this was the maternity ward, they made sure that we were able to get into, as you can see from this, every room without exception. And because of how quick the JISCO is, I think we spent on average maybe 40 seconds in each room. We were able to go in, kind of move the iPad around and get the layout of the room. We would try to hit at least 1 to 2 corners of the room, depending on where the patient was in the room and how much family they had in them, because we try to be as, to not be any more disruptive than what we have to be. So that's why some of these rooms you can kind of see, I just kind of went in, poked my head in, and came back out. But yeah, this was a real survey that we actually did.
Um, so there's a question that came into the Q&A, just to, if we can explain a little bit deeper about the Just Go and how we can make it work so well in these types of environments. So Troy, maybe like you could explain a little bit about some tips around like Just Go, and actually we can see it in action a little bit clearer in these slides.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll dive into Just Go for those not familiar with the feature, but listening to Aaron reminded me of something that bothers me a lot. A little bit of tangent here. The movie Mission Impossible, right? Whenever they're trying to break into a super secret facility, and that the one person on their team's like super hacker, and he's able to get 3D hyper accurate blueprints for that building, that's the moment when I'm watching that movie that I'm like, they've gone too far, right? All the other stunts, I can buy into that, but when they grab accurate, real-time 3D floor plans, I'm like, no one has access to those, right? That's impossible, right? So just go survey. The real value of it is for surveying, like Aaron pointed out, uh, floors that you don't have accurate floor plans to, or that you can't get copies of those floor plans to. And that's where you need to do the survey. You need to collect the information, and it gives you an option. It's another tool that you have in your tool belt where you can still perform a survey, collect some data to diagnose and triage any issues, validate coverage and signal strength, right? But you're not burdened with having to find a super accurate floor plan. And like Aaron mentioned earlier, it may take hours just to mark up that floor plan, drawing the walls, all the different materials. laying that out. Now, there are features within Ekahau where you can auto draw the walls. That helps speed up some time, right? But if you can just use the one tool that you have and just jump right into troubleshooting while you're there at that spot on the hospital, Just Go is the tool to make that happen. And as Aaron mentioned, turning on the lights helps make things more accurate. We also highly recommend that the mobile device that you use has the LiDAR cameras built into it. So that tends to be the pro versions of the iPads and the pro versions of the phones. It just gives you that more accurate 3D model to detect walls, desks, pillars, like Aaron mentioned, that are in and around your environment. It's my belief that Just Go is the most accurate site survey feature and method that's out there. Because you can detect how far away you are from the walls, it always knows your relative position on that floor in that room, right? And it's drawing the walls for you while you navigate around. So you don't have to stare at the floor plan and try to figure out where do I click on the map for my continuous
Yep.
survey? Or if you're a big believer in stop and goes, where am I standing at this moment in time? It's taking care of that for you, right? So it's hyper accurate and it also creates that floor plan for you so that when you're all done the survey, you have that floor plan in your project that you can then analyze and see where you're going, right? So another thing that helps out is sometimes people have cases on their phones, and some cases are thicker than others. That case may not look like it, but it may be impacting the wide view angles of that camera. So that could be impacting the accuracy for your Just Go project. So you may want to think about removing the case while you use your Just Go survey method to collect that data and walk around. And you can see on the screen here in this quick little video, as you're walking around, you're just pointing your camera at the walls. When the walls are detected, you'll see on the screen they appear green. You'll see that white outline, that trace, the framework, indicating the corners, the ceiling, the floor levels of all the walls that have been detected. So just keep walking around until that framework has been created. I will give you a bit of warning. It does seem a little bit creepy for maybe the patients in the hospital room because you see the video screen on your mobile device. Sometimes they think that you're recording a video, that you may be live streaming to TikTok or something like that. So sometimes you
Yeah.
just have to reassure them you're
Yes.
not capturing video, you're just measuring the walls, drawing a floor plan while you're collecting data, but you're not actually capturing or saving any of the video content like that. So just something to be aware of, especially in the hospital type environment.
Yeah, and Troy, if you don't mind, real quick, the I want to throw on another value add about that is, as the principal senior engineer, I don't always have the time to go out and do these, and so a lot of times what we'll do is send out one of the junior engineers with the iPad and the Sidekick too, and they'll go out and do the Just Go survey, and we upload it to the Epic. Sorry, Ekahau cloud, and I'm able to instantly access it from home where I'm at. And that is also the huge power that we get out of this is using their cloud to be able to store these projects and to be able to get the information to me quickly so I can review it and kind of disseminate it and help the newer engineers kind of interpret what they're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just kind of wanted to give you a bit of a glimpse into what the data would look like after completing a Just Go survey. So this was a friend of mine who's based in the UK. He reached out and shared this project with me. I actually know he's on the webinar today. I've seen him in the chat as well. But he I turned up to go and complete a survey at a warehouse. Turned out that the floor plans for the warehouse was completely inaccurate, not relative to what was actually there. So the only choice really was to leverage doing a Just Go survey. And from walking around the warehouse, this is actually a warehouse with lots of racks and aisles. Was able to pick up the AP locations. You can see the coverage, you can see the heat maps, but also was able to detect that there was non-Wi-Fi interferers here. So there was a lot of co-channel interference. It turned out to be because there was a lot of non-Wi-Fi interference happening on 5 gigahertz. That once they identified them, they was able to shut them off. That meant that the APs in the warehouse would then start using some additional channels on 5 gigahertz, and it improved the connectivity for the user in the warehouse. So I think back to when I've been in this situation before, when I turned up on site, if there was no floor plans or no accurate floor plans, you were really stuck with the options that you could do. So the fact that you've got this now is a great additional thing that you can leverage and use. And we're not saying like Just Go is necessarily like the way you should go all of the time. If you have got up-to-date and accurate floor plans, and then you can do one of the other survey modes on top of it, and then great. But the fact that now that you have an option, if you don't have floor plans, is really beneficial and can be leveraged to gather some insights of the data that you can then make some changes to improve the performance of a network is a great option to have. And we will have some nice new upgrades coming to Just Go at some point later on this year as well. And
Nice.
if you're wondering about the accuracy, Troy, we've got like a couple of sketches here, right, showing a difference between the Just Go and a real floor plan.
Yeah, and there's been a couple comments that have come up in the chat around this. So this is just giving you that comparison. And again, as Matt pointed out, the value of this feature is when you do not have the floor plan, right? Ideally, you'd be that super hacker on Team Mission Impossible and you'd have hyper accurate floor plans and you wouldn't need to use this feature. But if you don't and you're in a pinch and you need to survey that basement floor that someone decided to put three APs in one of those remote medical clinics and you need to survey that, this is just another option that you have for you, right? And so here we see the contrast between a good quality, accurate floor plan and what would look like if we use Just Go to draw that floor plan for us, right? And the Just Go, it does look like a little bit of a sketch, right? But you can clearly make out which rooms are offices, hallways, and you can draw some very intelligent conclusions for your analysis that you may need to take back to your senior leadership team, the executives of the healthcare board, and justify why you may need to make changes to your wireless network. You will have the data to draw those insights and present that to them, right? And as Matt mentioned, we are looking at features where we'll be able to enhance those floor plans after the fact and make them look more accurate, more professional looking as opposed to those sketches. But it's managing trade-offs with the hardware capabilities of the mobile devices and how long you can spend surveying while you're on site in Just Go mode.
Awesome. So I spoke about earlier that we were going to look at a zoom in of one of the Just Go surveys. And so with this input tracking system, we had a room where when the mother would take the infant towards the window on the outside edge of the room, they would lose the baby in the input tracking system. And then as she would get towards the hallway side of the room, then the baby would show up again. And it was just this room. And so we started, trying to figure out what was going on because, nothing had changed in the network or anything like that. And they're across a street from this set of rooms is one of our patient parking garages that the previous year had just had a new parking garage system installed that was more automated and had some, other features in it other than just, you know, getting in and out. And so we were able to use Just Go to notice that there was some interference the closer we got to this window of this room. And the Ekahau was actually able to even um, tell us that it was Bluetooth interference. And, as we all know, Bluetooth is just crazy, crazy dirty in 2.4. And that's what these, badges, you know, what they beacon on. And so we worked with the parking company and, figured out, hey, what is this doing? How is it doing? And why is it doing it? And we got them to agree to temporarily shut down that one unit that was closest to this room. And as soon as they did, boom, magically mom could take baby near the window again. And the baby was able to be tracked, in all four corners of the room. And, again, we had some suspicions, but we had no idea that it was from Bluetooth interference coming from across the street. And had it not been for the abilities and tools provided to us by Ekahau, we'd have been scratching our head for forever trying to figure out what was going on. And, again, this was something that we were able to figure out in minutes, instead of, hours, days, or weeks of trying to troubleshoot this. And so this was a real life scenario of where we were able to take kind of a hidden problem because none of us thought that there'd be interference coming all the way across the street from the parking garage. But that was exactly what we ran into. And so, again, it was Ekahau to the rescue to help us figure out what was going on and do it in a very quick manner, because the rooms were full. There was no other room to move the mom to. And, and she, rightfully so, wanted to be able to sit by the window when the sun was out with the baby. And so, we were able to figure out what was going on and make everybody happy. So client analysis, one of the newer features that we've really been making use of. So one of the projects that we've been going into is wireless SpectraLink phones. And for any of you that have to deal with SpectraLink phones, my heart goes out to you, and I'm sorry for you. They're a frustrating device, that has issues. And so what we had recently tried to do was disable TKIP on that SSID. And when we did, only half of the phones would rejoin the network. And so we did a little bit of troubleshooting. We were starting to get towards the end of our maintenance window, and so we couldn't go any further. So we re-enabled TKIP, and within 30 seconds of re-enabling TKIP, all 139 SpectraLink phones were back on the network. And so we started working with the voice team, and they confirmed, yep, these are set to work with both TKIP and WPA2. Still wouldn't work without TKIP. And so what we did then is I went on site and had the voice team met me there, and they had a couple different of the models of the handsets. And we used this two features. We used the client analysis feature that they spoke about earlier, and then we used the wireless packet capture. And what we were able to find through utilizing these two features was that the phones are not advertising TKIP as an available option on their group cipher. It was only offering TKIP, and CCNP was not in the list. And and so again, the phones were configured to work with WPA2, but in real functionality, like Matt mentioned earlier, these devices lie. And even though the device was configured to work without TKIP, it would not work without it. And, leadership really struggled to kind of buy the story that we were telling them that, hey, these phones are designed to work with it, but they're not working without it. And they just kind of had a hard time, taking that in. And so with using the client analysis and the ease of packet capture, Ekahau is the single quickest, smoothest wireless packet capture tool I've ever used. We love it, and we use it all the time. And so we were able to actually get into the probe and management beacons and actually see that the phone was only offering TKIP in its group cipher. And so, then at that point, we were able to take this concrete data, to management, and we're now starting to form a strategy to try to move away from these devices and, move to Jabber on iPhones. So it was a great tool, and it took us less than a half hour to do everything. And, we were able to get figured out what was going on and have concrete data and scientific proof of what was going on.
Yeah, what I love about what we've spoken and heard you say so far, Aaron, is that Ekahau has really kind of helped you and your team being able to find complex issues a lot faster and a lot easier. I know you mentioned quite a few things in this particular scenario you're talking about, that a lot of users may never even understand like how of a technical depth level you need to go to be able to find this kind of information. So the fact that you have access to these features now that can make it faster and easier, and then more accessible for other members of your team that you said that go out and do this type of work for you, gives you access to that data that you can then take to your management to enforce these kind of like changes, which has been quite helpful for you, I think.
Absolutely, 100%. And it's just, again, and there's other ways to do packet captures, but we're a Windows shop. So, we don't have Macs in our network. And so, as doing packet captures in Windows is a little more challenging than it is in the Mac world. With the Sidekick 2 and the Analyzer app, we pick our three channels that we want to do wireless packet captures on, and bam, we do it, and we have all the information we need. And it's another phrase we use is educated decisions, and we're able to make decisions based on actual data rather than just our gut feeling.
Excellent. So, since there might be some people on the webinar that are not familiar with using the Analyzer application with the Sidekick 2 to perform wireless packet captures and then analyze some of that information, me and Troy are going to give you a bit of a demo now for doing the packet captures, analyzing some of the frames, and then leveraging the client analysis feature to be able to kind of like show you a bit of a easier process, perhaps, of being able to do that. So, the reason why you want to do a wireless packet capture is typically you want to do some analysis, like down to the protocol level, looking at different frames to try and find some of those things that Aaron was mentioning earlier that they had issues with. So the kind of process and steps required to be able to get to the point to do the frame analysis is that you first of all, you want to identify the access points that are around you, what channel that they're using, and the client device that you have if you're trying to troubleshoot a specific client device, so that you can make sure that you've got the Sidekick set up to be configured on the channels that are going to be in use. So you want to verify the channels. You're then going to perform the wireless packet capture, and the frames will then start to be collected by the radios of the Sidekick. Once you've captured enough data, or you've got to a point where you think you've captured the issue or the particular frame that you're after, you can finish the capture. You can then share it with your device from your iPad or your iPhone to your laptop via the typical kind of like iOS sharing mechanisms, and then you're ready to then open that packet capture in your favorite protocol analyzer tool. It can be Wireshark, CloudShark, OmniPeak, whatever you would like. So how would you first of all find out what channels are in use around you? If you fire up our network overview application with the Sidekick 2 connected, you can see all of the networks around you, and then you can find the particular access point by the name or MAC address, and then verify what channels it's using on 5 gigahertz or 6 gigahertz or even 2.4 gigahertz. Once you've located the channels that are in use, you can then go to the packet capture feature. You simply hit capture. You pick the channels you want to perform the capture on, and then you simply hit capture. You then let it run for as long as you would like it to be. And then once you're finished, you can just hit share and then share it to whoever you want to, however you would like to share it. Then once you've got that packet capture, you can open it in Wireshark in this example here. In the scenario that I want to show you, I wanted to find out what is some of the capabilities of my iPhone. So I'm looking for the particular frame. I'm actually looking for the association request frame. And once I found that frame, I can then go through all of the different decodes, and I can start to see the different capabilities in my client device. And in the example that Aaron was providing earlier, he was going to look in for a particular cipher suite to see if the device was actually advertising TKIP. This is where the sort of like granularity that you're going to need to get into to be able to kind of find the information. So again, might look a little bit scary. We have simplified it as much as we can from an Ekahau perspective to give you access to be able to do this. And then you might be wondering, like, well, why is it the association request frame that we're so interested in? If I just show you the difference between my iPhone's probe request frame and the association request frame, sometimes what client devices do in that initial probe request, rather than it doesn't advertise all of its capabilities. So in this example here, my iPhone is actually saying it's a one spatial stream capable device. So you can see it's got support for one spatial stream here on the transmit and then receive. And then if I look at the association request frame, the difference here is it actually says that you can do 2 spatial streams for transmit and receive. And there's some other little features like that different devices will say that they can and can't do based on the probe request versus the association request. So if you ever want to do some in-depth analysis of a particular client device, always try and capture the association request. So that was looking at it from doing it from a wireless packet capture and then protocol analysis perspective. Troy, maybe you can tell everyone how to do it from the client analysis.
Yeah, packet capturing perspective is great. Often you hear the saying that the packets never lie, right? But the catch is sometimes the packet interpreters do, right? So another tool that you have in your tool belt to help get some insight into what the clients are capable of is the client analysis tool that's part of the Analyzer app that you can install on your mobile device, right? And this gives you the perspective of the client device itself. And so the idea here is that you would take your mobile device, all right, or whatever device it is, if it's the SpectraLink or a Zebra device or any other device a client device you want to troubleshoot, you would then move that device close to your iPad, right? And the iPad will give you a list of all the client devices that it hears around you, right? So I want to emphasize this point. We're not scanning for access points. we're scanning for the client devices that are in and around you, right? And we prioritize that list of devices so that the ones that are closest to the Sidekick are the ones that float to the top of that list. Now, you also get some insight into what SSID your client device is, so you can help isolate it. Or if you know the MAC address of your client device, you'll see that populate in the list. So once you've identified your client device, you can then drill down into that device and see what capabilities that client device reports up to the access point. And as Matt described, sometimes the initial reports or the capabilities listed by the client, it's not the true reveal, right? So the way I like to describe it is sometimes the clients don't like to show off to the access point, right? They don't want to make themselves appear more feature rich, more capable, so they downplay some of their capabilities. And that's where Matt pointed out that true reveal comes from the association request frame. So that's that one magical frame that you want to capture. And if you want to renew your Wi-Fi Geek card and dive into packet captures and go through all those steps that Matt explained, feel free. Have at her, renew your Wi-Fi geekiness card for another year. But if you want to take an easier and faster approach to understand your client capabilities, this is an option that you have available to you, right? So your client will connect. Just in the interest of time, I won't jump into to a demo, but we do have some slides that kind of walk you through the concept here. As your client connects and you drill down into that client view, right? You'll get the reported capabilities of your clients, right? And this is happening in real time as we're analyzing traffic passing through the airwaves between the client and the access point. But remember, a key to this step to get the reveal all for those client capabilities is we want to capture that association request frame. So to fully populate all the features in this visualizer is you may need to disconnect your client and have it reconnect to the wireless network to re-trigger that association request frame passing through the airwaves. And once the Sidekick captures that frame, it'll populate additional fields in this display. So just remember, initially you may not see everything. Just disconnect, reconnect, and in fact, we give you a warning in the app, just remind you that you may need to go through this step. But that's capturing that exchange will help you understand roaming capabilities like R, K, and V, security capabilities, data rates that supports, and lots of extra information about your client device. So again, another tool that you have in your tool belt to help narrow down, zoom in on what could be causing troubles in your Wi-Fi deployment.
Yeah, and I worked quite closely with the product team in helping with this feature, and I actually learned a lot as well going through that process. And so just to reveal a little bit under the hood of what is actually happening here, when you see the list of clients in that initial view, and then you select a client, what we actually do is we dedicate a radio of the Sidekick 2 to that specific channel that we now know that that client device is connected to on the access point. And another thing that is really important to point out that again, another something that I learned going through this process is one we want to capture the association request frame, but also there's something else that we want to do to ensure we get the most accurate report back from the client device. So in this scenario here, I had two SSID setups. So I've called the first one being the client analysis test one, and this is for my iPhone 15 Pro. And what you'll notice here is like when we get the information, it says like management frame protection is not supported, 11R is not supported. 11K is not supported. However, if I then do the same test again, but connected to a different SSID called Client Analysis Test 2, and we go through the same process of capturing that information, I connect and disconnect my iPhone from the network to capture that association request frame. Take a look at the capabilities here in a second when it goes through that process and the difference that it reports. Now management frame protection is required, 11R is supported, and 11K. If I show you a side by side, here on test one, these three options are not supported, but these three options are either required or supported. And if I take a look at how the SSID I had configured on CA test one, it was WPA2 only, R set to disabled, and 11W set to disabled. Whereas on test two, it was WPA3, 11R enabled, and then 11W required. So what actually we put in this kind of dialog box here is not only trying to make sure you capture the association request frame, but it's also important that you have a test SSID with everything enabled, because what the client device will do is it will sometimes mimic what the SSID is configured for. So rather than advertising that, yes, I can do RK and management frame protection, like it said in the test two. But when I had it disabled on test one, it was like, oh yeah, I don't support those things either. So to get the best, most accurate results, you need to configure an SSID with everything enabled and capture the association request frame. And the other nice thing I like about the client analysis is that you can get real granular expert information at a nice digestible way. So you can see the MCS rates, retry rates, how many frames have been exchanged back and forth, which can give you a real nice insight into how a client device is behaving on your particular network. And then, Aaron, a few best practices recaps around healthcare Wi-Fi.
Absolutely. And so, one of the things that we're kind of stuck dealing with in healthcare is a lot of times we have to design for our worst clients, not the best clients. And, when things are mutually exclusive, sometimes we have to kind of maybe sacrifice a device that might not be as patient critical for a lower capable device that is more, um, patient critical. 2.4 with the spectrum, it's definitely about trying to contain 2.4 the best you can, because we're never going to eliminate it. I can't speak for all verticals and all businesses and stuff like that. I can only speak for where my specialty is, and healthcare 2.4 is in the foreseeable future never going to go away. In healthcare, we have to accept imperfect roaming and design our overlap accordingly. iPhones are kind of, you know, they're right up there with Spectralinks for the bane of our existence. They are terrible roamers. And, we have made improvements by, doing some different changes and things like that. Uh, but it's just sticky clients is a part of healthcare, and bad roaming is something that we just have to try to design for the best we can, and something we have to deal with. With performance, we are going to have lower minimum data rates enabled and MCS indexes and things like that. And so, we're not designing for the wireless device to do 1 gig of speed. What we're trying to do is sacrifice some of that performance for better reliability and better predictability. I made this comment earlier with validation. Do yourself a favor, and anytime you make any changes or do a new install, do your post installation wireless survey. Because it'll do yourself a favor, it'll do your end users a favor, and it gives you that opportunity to say, all right, I did the predictive survey in Ekahau, and this is how it said that it was going to come out. We had our installers do the installation, and now we're going to do the post-installation survey and see what the differences are between what actually happened and versus the predictive survey. The predictive surveys are great, and they usually do a very, very good job of getting spot on, but it's not always identical, and it's not always the same. And so those validations are really, really critical. And then, behavior, you have to kind of design for how clients behave. And if there's a certain cipher that it wants to work with, or if there's certain data rates that it works with better than others, we kind of have to design for how the devices behave, versus a standard that we want to achieve. We always have this joke at our hospital called Shangri-La. If we could have the perfect design, this is what it would look like, and we're always trying to get there. But sometimes we have to design for the devices that we have, and maybe not always design for how we would like it to be.
Absolutely. I think healthcare is probably one of the most challenging environments to design, deploy, manage, and keep a good Wi-Fi network running. It is probably one of the I would say probably the most common vertical that I would still recommend that you do AP on a stick surveys for, because you can be caught out or surprised by what you might think would be a typical wall can turn into a lead wall, something that's going from 3 dBs to 30
Yeah.
dBs. getting on site to validate your design, getting on site to validate any kind of changes, and regularly just trying to like keep an idea of what is going on in the environment. You've got so many people bringing in their own different devices, rogue devices, new types of interference, changes to the actual physical footprint and layout and reconfiguring of the environment as well has a huge impact. So it's definitely one of those environments that we should be validating for sure. If
And
you
Aaron brought this up earlier about the critical nature of Wi-Fi in hospitals and how it's being used to monitor patients in transit from, the operating room to their restroom. And people throw around the term Wi-Fi is critical. I think it's kind of showcased and highlighted at the forefront in healthcare. People literally can die when Wi-Fi fails. To me,
Yeah.
that's the definition of what Wi-Fi criticality means, right? So hyper challenging in these hospital and healthcare environments to make sure you get things working and do things right.
Yeah, if you don't mind me putting a stamp on that real quick, here's a real life example that we ran into at the end of last year. Is we have a department. So the three types of voice devices that we work with in our hospital is Jabber on iPhones. They don't have SIM cards in them. Spectralink phones and Vocera badges, and we have a PACU, post procedure unit that all they use is the iPhones. And this is before we had made some of the changes that we made to have the iPhones roam better. And we had a nurse that had a patient that coded, and she could not get her iPhone to call for help, and she literally had to stop CPR to go out in the hallway and yell down the hallway for help, and then go back into the room and start CPR back up again. And so, in our environment, Wi-Fi really can mean the difference between life and death. And, that's why we're so grateful to have, a system like Ekahau to help us do the best that we can and provide the best patient and caregiver experience that we can.
Yeah, that is yeah, really powerful example. Thank you for sharing that, Aaron. If you have enjoyed this webinar on the healthcare Wi-Fi, we have a guide all around hospital Wi-Fi, healthcare Wi-Fi in these challenging moments if you'd like to download that. Also, if you'd like to sign up for our next Ekahau webinar where we're going to be continuing our decoded Wi-Fi series, and this time it's going to be all around performing accurate site surveys. You can sign up for that, which is going to be on April 30th. Also, if you're going to be in London next week, I can't wait to see you in person. And then, yeah, huge thank you from us, Aaron. We will probably stay on for a couple of minutes to just run through the Q&A. Aaron, I know you said you can stay on for a few minutes as
Yep,
well, but in case you
absolutely.
can't, just okay, brilliant. Yeah, huge thank you for joining us. Let me bring back Dale because I know he's been monitoring the Q&A for us today. So, any questions you think we should tackle first, Dale?
Yeah, so this question comes from Ben, and obviously every situation, every environment's unique with its own set of variables. But it's in regards to bleed through between floors. So if I'm on the fourth floor of a hospital, I detect APs from the second, third, fifth, and sixth floor. Is there a way to remedy this to where we can keep the fourth floor signal strictly on that floor?
That is a great question. I saw that. And then there was another one that I marked as that I wanted to answer live, which can tie into that one. Where was it? Yes, so there's a question around like difficulty when it comes to design, tips and tricks with that, managing CCI, and then this one about having APs on the fourth floor that can be heard between floors. I think these were great questions. Aaron, Troy, if you don't mind, I'll try and tackle this first from my perspective, and we can see if they're in line with what you guys think
Sure.
if we agree on or not. So, in my experience, there there can sometimes be a lot of interfloor roaming when you're managing a Wi-Fi, not even just in healthcare, but in an office space, in hotels, any kind of environment where you've got multiple floors, because like clients don't understand that you're on the fifth floor and there's 10 APs on the fifth floor as well, but also there's 10 on the sixth and 10 on the third floor. They just listen to the signal strength from the access points and other bits and pieces that's going to help like inform their decision to when they what they're going to associate to and then what they're going to roam to. So depending on your design and the configuration of your radios can really impact how your client devices are going to hear APs on the same floor. And I remember when I was starting my journey into Wi-Fi, there would be a lot of training courses that I would go on to, and I would hear people talking about salt and pepper. They weren't talking about how grey or dark my hair were. They was talking about the design approach for the design approach for, let's say if you've got three floors, like on the fourth floor, you would maybe put like AP. I'm trying to show how I can show it here, but AP in the top left, middle, and then top right. Then the fifth floor, you'd go bottom left, top middle, bottom right. So they're kind of not stacked on top of each other. They're in like opposite positions. Like that's what they would kind of refer to as salt and pepper design between floors. So I would take that information and I implemented it into quite a few of the designs and things that I had done. And then what I was noticing for quite a lot of the client devices when I was looking at the information on the controllers is I was seeing the client devices bounce between the different floors quite a lot. And I was thinking, well, you're kind of stood. I'm on the client device is stood underneath, pretty much underneath an AP on the third floor, but it's connecting to an AP on the fourth floor. And I was like, well, what is going on here? Why is it doing that? So then I decided to take the approach of testing and trying out instead of salt and peppering the access points. What I wanted to actually do is more stack as much as I could stack APs on top of each other on the different floors. So between floors three, four, five, six, I would be trying to put APs where physically possible that make the most sense, pretty much right on top of each other with controlled cell sizes, so not just maximum transmit power. And when I decided to take that approach to my designs, I noticed the interfloor roaming of client devices go bouncing between floors when you're on the current floor that you are significantly dropped. And I then took that kind of approach to pretty much all of my designs moving forward after that, because especially if you've got environments with like atriums or big open spaces as well, where it's easy for the cells, the coverage from access points to leak between floors. I found when you stack APs on top of each other, I had a much higher success rate of keeping the clients that were on that particular floor connected to the APs on that floor. And then to take it like one step beyond, especially if you are working in environments with atriums and things like that, when you're designing for the Wi-Fi where the atriums are, keeping the APs as far back from the atrium as possible, and also trying to leverage directional antennas sometimes to kind of focus the coverage back in towards where the users are going to be, so it's not as close to the atrium. That was quite a long-winded way of answering that, but that I personally found having quite a lot. I found quite a lot of success going down that path. I don't know if Aaron, Troy, you have got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, you were mentioning the salt and pepper, the Hugs input tracking system that we've talked about a lot. They actually have a design requirement that the APs are stacked on top of each other between the floors. Um, and we weren't able to perfectly do it because the floors weren't identically designed, some of them. But yeah, and the other things that I would kind of mention to help with the bleed through is, it's all about cell sizes. If you can try to raise your data rates a little bit and MCS indexes some, along with some other, RF tweaking, depending on what your wireless platform is. We're a mixed Cisco and Juniper shop. You can really help to shrink those cell sizes a little bit without sacrificing the overlay of the cells for roaming within the same floor.
Yeah, I probably highlighted quite how long I've been working in Wi-Fi for, because most of the time the reason that they were suggesting the salt and pepper design is because that was back at a time when we was pretty much just designing for coverage. So the reason to go with the salt and pepper design was that you could provide significant coverage on the floor below from an AP above. So that was a way of like providing coverage when Wi-Fi was more of a nice to have compared to what it is now. But also, Aaron, what you said earlier in some of your slides talking about having higher think about your minimum basic rates, like raising those minimum basic rates to not be at the lowest possible can also like help kind of that tighten that cell size, which might also encourage client devices to be connecting, have a higher success rate of connecting to the AP that they're actually more closer to.
Yep, great points.
Hmm. Okay, Dale, any other questions you think we should answer today?
Yeah, I'll try to attach two questions into one. But Troy, I heard Troy mention a little bit about DAS antennas, and they should be separated at a distance from access points, wireless APs. Is there a minimum recommended distance? That's part one of the question. But also, the question was asked if the speakers can share their opinions on CBRS spectrum for use in hospitals and healthcare environments.
Yeah, so for the first question, and it's about defining safety margin, right? So there's not an absolute value that if you separate them by a certain distance, you'll be guaranteed safety. It's all about safety margins, right? And so the comfort level that I find that I'm comfortable with is I recommend at least 2 meters of separation, right? And so sometimes you can gauge that by ceiling tiles. If they're 1 meter ceiling tiles, you can say, at least two ceiling tiles away. But I find that to be a good recommendation. The further, the better, but I like to recommend at least 2 meters. You can also look for access points, and some manufacturers support this, is they've put a little bit more engineering and thought into their antenna designs, and they do have filtering on their access points where they will filter out frequencies and channels from neighboring cellular antennas to remove those that bleed over from those competing frequencies, right? So you may want to look for that as a feature in the access point model, or maybe it's one of the influencing factors for deciding on a particular vendor that you want to go with, right? So that's one thing to think about. The other thought or the other question was related to CBRS, which I think it's a fantastic technology, right? And for those of you who aren't aware, you can also design for private 5G CBRS inside AI Pro Online, right? So we do have some CBRS radios and access points that you can place on your floor plans, just as you would with the Wi-Fi design, and you can build and create that for indoor design for CBRS. With respect to its effectiveness of technology, I find you need a lot fewer CBRS radios to cover the same square footage or the square meters across your hospital. It's We're seeing a lot of successful deployments in mines and warehouses that are university campuses that are already deploying CBRS. They get great coverage. There's not a lot of competition on the 3.5 gigahertz band. So there's a lot of spectrum that's available. You do need to think through how you'll load eSIMs onto your devices and making sure that all the clients that you want to connect will support eSIM or maybe even a manual SIM, a physical SIM that you have load onto those devices. So that can become a challenge. So it may not be universally supported across your environments, but if you have dedicated devices that support that, it's definitely an option that you want to consider as part of your tool belt to provide dedicated connectivity with a very predictable latency, low latency for those devices that need it.
Thanks, Troy.
And just to wrap up very quickly, because I could see there was another question that came in from Lionel based on what I said around like minimum basic rates. So like what should they set? So if we're talking 5 and 6 gigahertz, I would recommend go with 24 megabits if you can. If you're finding issues with that, drop down to 12 megabits per second. If you're talking 2.4 gigahertz, it depends on the client devices that you may need to support, especially in healthcare. Ideally, you'd want it to be at 12 as well. But if you've got some really older devices that support 11B, then you might need to set that to 11 for them to be supported. So it will come down to a little bit around your client devices, your environment that you support. But typically for most environments, and especially 5 or 6 gigahertz, 24 or 12 would be kind of like recommendation I would say to try out. But I know we've gone over quite a bit here, but we always want to try and answer as many questions live on the webinar as we can from the Q&A in the chat. Thank you so much, Aaron, again for sharing your insights and what you can with us around like healthcare Wi-Fi. From keep an eye on like the chat and the comments and stuff that was going on there. Pretty much everyone was one of the ones that stood out to me was like how much of an eye opener this was to some of the attendees on the webinar today, like how hard and how tricky healthcare Wi-Fi is. So being able to
Good.
share your kind of insights into some of your successes that you've had with your knowledge and using the Ekahau portfolio to assist you with that, I think has been really insightful for everybody.
Good. Good. This was really exciting. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm really glad that everybody found this useful. And I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. If anybody else has any other questions or anything like that, don't hesitate and hit me up. And I will do my best to answer your questions.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Aaron, Troy, Dale, and all of you fantastic people for joining us on the Ekahau webinar today. Hopefully, I see you in London next week. If not, we'll see you on the next webinar in a few weeks' time. Have a great rest of your day, and yeah, see you all soon.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks
everyone.
all.